That's a little hard to predict, partly because he does contradict himself. There's at least two things going on. One is that he's going through a big learning process. This is the nature of being a political outsider. He doesn't have any experience in how government works, and I don't think he even understands yet the limits on the presidency. So for example, when he says he wants to repeal Obamacare, he cannot repeal Obamacare. Only Congress can do that because it's a law. And I think there's a lot of issues like that where he's going to find out he has less ability to make decisions and determine policy than he currently understands. So it's a combination of going through a learning process, a big learning process, and figuring out that it's not like running a business. Let's start with China. China's going to be very interesting because he's taking a much more confrontational approach in his rhetoric to China than any of his predecessors in the past couple of decades. He's criticized China mostly on the basis of trade and currency policy. Although the economists largely don't support his position on currency, his claim that China is manipulating its currency for its own benefit, there is an interesting argument certainly about how trade policy benefits the Chinese versus the United States. What is clear, though, is he wants to take a much harder approach to China, including in the South China Sea. At the same time, though, he wants to not repeal, but pull out of TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Those two ideas don't mix very well, because if he wants to strengthen China, a good way to do that is to pull out of the TPP. Because the whole idea of the TPP is to link the other 11 economies to the United States economy. And China would actually love it if we don't sign the TPP. And this is an area where he has more latitude as president. This is an area in foreign policy where Congress has much smaller role to play than in domestic policy. Secondly, Russia. He has indicated that he wants to improve relations with Russia, and I actually think that makes sense. It doesn't make sense for us to have as confrontational a relationship as we currently do because we also have shared interests. One of the interesting things is going to be the first time Putin criticizes Trump. And Putin almost certainly will, because he is he's sort of free with his insults. He does like to sometimes make fun of other political leaders, and Trump has shown that he's not very comfortable with people making fun of him. So right now he seems to be very fond and admiring of Putin, but I will be very interested in seeing what happens the first time Putin says something that's critical of Trump or makes fun of him. The Middle East is a big issue. He has said that we're actually going to move our embassy to Jerusalem in Israel, which is what Israel considers to be its capital, but nobody else does for reasons, historical reasons, the way Jerusalem was divided. If he does that, that will send a very clear sign to Palestinians and other Arabs that the United States is throwing its weight 100% behind Israel and not trying to play the role of an intermediary for negotiations for a two-state solution and peace. So first of all, the situation in Asia is changing. Take a look at the Philippines. The Philippines was a very close ally of the United States. Now suddenly the president of the Philippines is, right after the Permanent Court of Arbitration decision was handed down in favor of the Philippines, the new Philippine president said, I don't particularly care about that anymore. I want a better relationship with China. And I don't particularly care about the relationship with the United States. So the pivot has not been entirely successful, in large part, I think, because Obama got distracted by Russia and other parts of the world. But it was a long-term program to begin with. The idea was to become more heavily invested in the Asia-Pacific Rim and to think about those relationships being as important to the United States as the European relationships, which traditionally are. And he has been critical of Japan for not carrying enough of the financial burden for supporting our defense presence in Japan. He's been critical of South Korea for exactly the same reason. He's barely mentioned the ASEAN countries in Southeast Asia. He's barely mentioned Australia and New Zealand. So again, I think this is another example where he's got a lot to learn and try to figure out how to combine his instincts. You know, his policy positions have been largely based on instincts and lack of complete information. Try to figure out how to pull all that together in a way that makes a coherent policy.